Audiobook Academy Biography presents Francesco Petrarch. He was a part of Renaissance Europe's academic and philosophical movement in the 14th century, most remembered for songs written to Laura, his mythological love, which he sang in love poetry. In the 14th century, Petrarch was one of Europe's most prominent Renaissance intellectuals and philosophers. In addition to prose, he was a prolific poet who influenced the likes of Garcilaso de la Vega and William Shakespeare greatly. Consonaire, the author's magnum opus, is the most accurate evocation of poetry in and outside of his own historical period. Early childhood and schooling. Francesco Petrarch, better known as Petrarch, was born in Arqua near Padua on July 20, 1304 and died in Venice in 1316. He was the son of a Florentine notary who, in 1312, fled to Avignon, where his family eventually settled in Carpentras. Consequently, Francesco Petrarch was exiled from his hometown, as was Dante Alighieri. Petrarch began his law studies in Montpellier in 1320, then moved on to Bologna, but never completed the course of instruction. While at Avignon following the death of his father in 1326, he may have entered one of the lower church orders. On Good Friday, April 6, 1327, he saw Laura at the Church of St. Clare, as he himself testified. It is widely accepted that Laura de Noves, who married de Sade, was the love of his life. On his travels to Italy and other European countries he served Cardinal Colonna. Before moving to Vaucluse near Avignon after the birth of the first of two illegal children, he lived there several times between his frequent voyages till 1349. On April 8, 1341, he was awarded a poetic laurel at the Campidoglio in Rome, where he had gained a great deal of notoriety. The lords of Padua had him enslaved starting in 1349. During this time, he was under the protection of Milan's authoritarian bishop, Visconti, who was despised by many of his contemporaries. Arqua, Italy, where he spent the final years of his life as a patient of the powerful, a visitor at the court, an advisor to the sovereign, and a relentless traveler. Career in writing. Those written in Latin by Francesco Petrarch differ from those written in colloquial language by him. The poet's Latin compositions helped him reach greater reputation and success. Epistles or letters have been published in the form of 24 volumes. It was after reading Cicero and Seneca's works that these letters were written. They also include his best-known collection of rhyme poems, as well as a number of his longer works. Most people know him for his Italian poems that were initially called rime sparse, after the syntagm from the opening sonnet's first verse, rather than his Latin title Rerum Vulgarium Fragmenta. Petrarch began a revision of his Italian lyrical opus in 1342 and worked on it until his death. The collection, known as the Consonaire, was published in Venice in 1470. Pre-Laura and post-Laura, after the epidemic in 1348, poems are separated into 366 pieces, largely sonnets. However, they deal with the most prevalent poetry. The majority of the songs are love ballads, with a few political ones thrown in here and there. It is the lyrical theme and, to a lesser extent, the love narrative that determines the arrangement of the poems, as evocation, introspection, metaphorization, and allegory take precedence over direct allusion to specific circumstances. It is common to see interpretations of the Consonaire based on a reconstruction of a love story in one soul's history, from a young man falling in love with an earthly woman to the Virgin Mary being invoked in the concluding canzone. Even nevertheless, unlike Beatrice in Dante's Inferno, Laura is not a lady angel because she lacks the ability to save anyone. When the soul is caught between the earthly and the transcendent, Laura remains a temptation for the soul to find its rest in God. Singing to married women who aren't interested in you, as Petrarch did, perpetuated a medieval practice and gave it a fresh spin. He created one of literature's most enduring myths. Even in its indirect forms, Laura, Breeze, or Lauro, Laurel, Laura is a minor character in the Consonaire. His mental and psychic center is the poetic theme, and he is the genuine protagonist. The appearance of the world is refracted via the prism of life's perception and cognition. As he reinterpreted medieval lyric poetry's motifs, he also developed the forms that had been handed down to him. He insisted on metrical syntactic regularity in the construction of verse, and as a result, the majority of sentence breaks are metrical. Antitheses and parallelism are used to great effect, yet the appearance of an artificial game is occasionally generated, which was not uncommon in troubadour lyrics. But Petrarch's reshaping of a number of lyrical forms, such as the sonnet, themes and metaphors, such as love as a fire, rhetorical and stylistic processes, such as multiple antitheses, pluralities or a succession of adjectives, etc., had a significant impact on the latter lyrics. Medieval experiences were mediated through the classical ideas of polished style, harmony, and proportion that he incorporated into his work. Also, on an ideological and societal level, he aimed to bring together Christian and non-Christian principles. It is impossible to identify a precise date for Petrarch's writings, as he frequently altered them, but it is feasible to credit increasing dependence on Latin models to his younger works and a partial return to medieval and Christian principles, but tensions are never addressed. A confessional fictional discussion between St. Augustine and the author of The Secret, Secretum Meum, 1342-43, is significant in this regard. As a model for Augustine's confession, Petrarch doesn't describe a history of conversion but the character of an individual who is torn apart by opposing goals. As depicted in the collection of biographical portraits on illustrious men, De Viris Illustribus, 1338-39, the Latin poem Africa, 1338, 39-42, and a collection of anecdotes about historical figures and the unforgettable books of things to be remembered, Rerum Memorandum Libri, 1343-45, classical models are prominent. Latin treatises, De Life Solitaria, De Ocio Religioso, De Remediis Utriusque Fortunae, 1354-60, contain characters and examples that are based on Christian theory, yet the conclusions are consistent with the teachings of the Church. His other works include 4 Latin polemics, 12 eclogues of the pastoral song, petitions and confessions in verse in the Psalm of Penitence, and hexameter verse for 66 Bible verses. Prose by Petrarch was grouped into 3 main categories: Familiarum Rerum, Seniles, and Sine Nomine. The unlisted letters are known as Varia. Triumphs, Triumphi, 1352, a 6-part poem in Dandy's thirds, sung in the spirit of medieval visions and old allegorical triumphal procession, is the sole Italian piece on the list. In her universalist medieval view, Petrarch blended his mythological picture of Laura into the rise of the human soul from temporary worldly desires to eternal fulfillment in God. Through his literary work and his philological investigation, inspired by the discovery of Cicero's letters to T. Atticus, Petrarch strove to synthesize medieval traditions and new revivals of antiquity at the end of the Middle Ages. Petrarch only partially inherited the experience of patristic and medieval allegorical elaboration and manipulation of the classical heritage in this attempt to reconcile antiquity and Christianity. He saw in ancient predecessors more than a mere preparation or instrument for proving Christian truth. Foreshadowing humanism, he contrasted ancient and medieval cultural models, thereby becoming the greatest pre-humanist and the most prominent poetic role model in European literature. Death. On July 19, 1374, in Arqua Petrarca, Italy, Francesco Petrarch died of a stroke. It is known that he was working on a Virgil manuscript at the time of his death, and was found the next morning with his head resting on it. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.